Hey, everybody, this is Bryan Setzer of the Setzer Group, and we're launching our inaugural Facebook Live today. You know, one of the things we've missed during COVID is meeting with fellow innovators and saddling up to a lounge area or a bar or talking with, leaders in the space that I've known for a long time. So I'm thrilled to have Richard Boyd here today, CEO of Tanjo. Richard is a Setzer Group board member, a longtime friend and collaborator, and we're going to spend about 30 minutes with you just, talking about where we've been, where we are, and what's next in terms of partnering man and machine together. And Richard, you might recognize my background. I was thinking back, we met in 2007 at the Grove Park Inn in Asheville. And this was before iPads and before Zooms and all these things. And I got some wild idea to do Second Life in front of all the superintendents in North Carolina. And I remember you were in the audience just saying, cool, let's talk about what we're doing with gaming and virtual worlds. And we struck up a friendship on the terrace that day. And, I knew right away you were eating barriers for breakfast back then. And one of the things that I wanted to kind of zero in today is the screenshot is actually from my virtual wedding, which you attended. Right. And, one of the things on those, barriers is that when I call somebody like you, it's like, cool, let me get my avatar ready and I'll get in there and participate, and we'll use technology to do things we didn't think possible. So it's been a great ride for almost 15 years. We're continuing to partner and collaborate together, and we're thrilled to have you on the show. So my first question, we're going to dive in like we're catching up, man. COVID and moving to and through where we are with the vaccines. What's the same? What's changed with where we are in man and machine?
Well, I think if anything, disruptions like this, inflection points in history tend to accelerate that sort of change. And I think to some extent that's happening. We're recognizing where there are opportunities to, achieve that balance between humans and machines. And I think, as you know, I believe that is the critical problem of the 21st century, at least the first couple of decades, is every organization, every individual, every country needs to be examining every single activity that we're doing and going like, the humans need to keep doing that? Or should we be turning matters of intelligence, effort, and attention, and I always talk about those three things, over to machines? And what has put in stark relief during COVID is the fact that there are a lot of things that we could turn over to machines where we don't need to be physically present with our effort, intelligence, and attention to accomplish things. So it's accelerating it, but we need to keep pushing forward, as I believe.
Yeah, and it's this whole notion of people are really locked in the tyranny of either or instead of the genius of both and. Everybody has experienced this now for a year, and they think they've experienced partnerships between man and machine. I would suggest they haven't. They've experienced really poorly designed remote learning, emergency remote learning. But they haven't really had the experiences where man and machine partner for unbelievable outcomes. So I know you're a person of the possible and an optimist. What are you working on, and how is your work in tech right now helping humanity?
Well, I've long had I will say since the turn of the century, as I like to say now, I've had my teammates and I sort of climbed up Maslow's hierarchy of needs a little bit, at least to one of those mid-tier rings at least. Yeah. And started thinking about, it's been fun working in computer games and movies and that sort of thing, but what can we do that's a little more serious, that has a positive impact on. I remember talking to Reid Hoffman and Joey Ito and folks like that who said, try to find something now that you've had a little bit of accomplishment that can have a positive impact on 1 billion people. And that's really fascinating. When you put things in those terms, it does kind of distill everything down to sort of existential issues like, like healthcare and education and the environment, and can people get enough water? Should we become a spacefaring civilization? That kind of thing. That's how I got into the whole Lockheed environment, and sold out to them. But today it continues. This tilting at these windmills in healthcare and education, especially, I think, are incredibly important. Education, especially now, and that's why I've enjoyed collaborating with you and your wife Robin, and talking at conferences, going to South by Southwest, and trying to nudge things a little bit further in the directions we think they ought to go, while we're also keeping the aperture open to listen to everybody, like the actual teachers and the actual parents and the actual students, about what they want. But it is a time to accelerate some of these things, and really, uh, you know, I think, especially during the pandemic, it's about, let's take, instead of just incrementally tacking on to what the things and the systems we've already built, let's take out a clean sheet of paper and ask some first principle sorts of questions, like, why do we publicly fund education, and what sorts of people do we need to make using our education systems,
Yep.
to become the architects of the future, and have kids who think like mathematicians and scientists, but also poets and artists and that kind of thing. So it's an interesting time.
Yeah. One of the things that I think we learned back in 1995, when Microsoft Office came into play, we didn't know its uses, right? And people had not yet embraced what that was going to do to transform the workplace. And then when you and I met in 2007, a lot of the discussion was about, taking courses online, or using these laptops in ways that could, have portable access, and we could, plug into a hole in the wall in India and learn the world and have access to the world. And yet here we sit in 2021, and I feel like it's deja vu all over again. I mean, I feel like that people are experiencing hybrid work, remote work, online learning, some for the first time. And they're forming assessments of that cause us, I think, in the work to have to figure out where we can meet them and where are they. So if you're talking about what we've seen this past year with digital equity and access, and how we've really rethought internet access as a fundamental right, that's really something we need to put in every
Yep.
community. And I know you're passionate about that. And then going beyond that, how do we solve for these equity gaps in the digital space? Because I think some of the barriers that people are interested in is, how do I access the great work you're doing at Tanjo AI, where you're starting to think in terms of how machine learning can enable the human condition and amplify it? Well, if I can't get it in these remote communities, what do we need to do as a country with infrastructure, not just on bridges, but fundamental infrastructure to connect people so that they can access the world? I know you're working on some really cool projects with the US government right now, and would love for you on our Barriers for Breakfast Facebook Live here to tell them a little bit about some of the problems you're trying to solve.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is really, like I said, it feels like a continuation of what you and I started trying to do at the North Carolina Virtual Public Schools back in 2008, 2009, whenever that was. It's still about, people still talk about it as digital transformation. How do we actually get everything digital? And that's, when I first started working with the Department of Education on that project to take everything that was scanned in at the Library of Congress and the Smithsonian, and turn that into something digital that could be transparent to inquiry, that could be available to teachers, something called the Learning Registry. We created a system that could automatically tag things that it found. For example, if it would read, a novel by Tolstoy, it could mark it as, Tolstoy novel, Russian, also, during a time of war, and a love story. that's what a human would do, but this thing would actually tag it with up to 4,000 weighted concepts, and just do that sort of digital overkill that AI can do today, but really create this powerful mapping ability that really helps it pair someone up with content they need a lot faster than any other methods that we had. But people are still making that little leap. Like they're saying, hey, we have big data, let's now get to something that's digital, not recognizing that once you get over that horizon to that hill, beyond you is this huge mountain, which is now you got to get to intelligence, which is data that's been processed in some way or some functions performed on it, so that we can amplify our own intelligence. And that's where all the new vistas open up, where all the new opportunities are, I think, in education. And we're just now beginning to see that horizon. So it's going to be a really interesting ride in the next decade if we all embrace that.
I think people, I would plus one all of that. And I think people are fearful. They started out with identity, right? Early in social media, nobody wanted to share their identity, and they were very cautious whether they logged on or whether they showed a picture of their families or shared where they were. Now, you can make an argument with Alexa in a lot of homes, or with the types of ubiquitous access we have today on mobile phones, that people are giving away mountains of data every day. And, what people do with that data, what we've learned in the past elections, I think it gives people pause, right? And they see it as a barrier. And one of the things we wanted to do with this Facebook Live series is help people understand that there are opportunities in every crisis. Like what we learned with the recent elections, what we learned with big data lakes and data pools, is that put in the wrong hands, they can be corrupted. And we do have to have a take on cybersecurity and a plan, but that shouldn't limit the opportunities and chances that young people get to experiment as a scientist online, or to do live critical thinking and prototypes with an expert across the globe. And so there's this tension, I think, of, opportunity and safety, crisis defined, right, as an opportunity and danger. And navigating that is what that chancellor of education needs, that superintendent of ed, that leader in a nonprofit, that leader of a workforce. So how do you start with these folks? How do you kind of let them know that you can protect their data and the things that make artificial intelligence and machine learning possible, but also create unlimited opportunity for them? How do you strike that balance? And I'll share a little bit of what we're learning too.
Well, I think there's a lot that you just said there, but I think the key areas where some of these all technology is a double-edged sword. Most of it is anyway. And AI and machine learning, those sorts of technologies are no different in that they can cut both ways. They can be very positive capabilities, but also very negative. And so I think everyone needs to start with just a reality check and a truth check. And we can use technologies to do that as well. Sort through all the information that's flowing at us, whether it's during COVID or what are the what's happening during what's happening with social media and privacy and all that sort of thing. Determine what's true and what's actionable, and then and come up with what are the right sort of action steps I can take. But one of the things I'll say about privacy is absolutely, today in 2021, an illusion. You can put all the different GDPR sorts of restrictions on things and all that, and still it's an illusion. And the reason is our technologies are advancing so fast that even if you make a system that is HIPAA compliant, or you make a system that is FERPA compliant in education, we can de-anonymize it like that. And I can find out exactly who that person is. If they're online at all, if you have any digital exhaust whatsoever, I can de-anonymize if you guys are familiar with that term, and figure out that's Bryan Setzer. That's who went in and went through this educational system, or that's the person who went into this doctor visit and got diagnosed with this thing on this day. It's too easy to do. And I think back to when the credit agencies all got compromised, and everyone, and I was actually on Wall Street speaking at a conference, and everyone said, oh, it's going to be interesting to find out tomorrow what happens to the price of an identity on the black market. Well, you know what we found out? The price didn't change at all. What does that tell you? The black market already has all of your information. You're already out there. So it really is about, how do you manage the multiple identities that you're going to have? And then how do we use that information in a positive way to model for better education outcomes, to make the kinds of people we need, better health outcomes, better societal outcomes, and prevent the manipulation that has happened during elections and Brexit and all that stuff. We need to inoculate our citizens against disinformation and against the targeted manipulation of these systems. And we're talking about, that's the most important conversation for us to have today. You talk about barriers. It's those sorts of things.
One of the things that people joining us today for our first sort of Facebook Live Barriers for Breakfast event, where we talk with innovators about how they're embracing barriers and then moving to innovation, may not know is some of the personal stories that we've experienced. And I'm going to cue Richard up for a couple that he can think about where he's encountered a barrier and then come out on the other side. And then I'm going to tell two first, just to sort of tee it up. When Richard and I first met, we had a legislature come to us at North Carolina Virtual Public School while Richard was on my board, and they wanted us to stand up a series of world language courses in less than 3 months. Now, I was a trained practitioner. I had been in a Baldrige district in Iredell Statesville. I had some skill sets, but I had never built a virtual world for world languages. So one of the things that I do whenever I'm looking at barriers is, who's smarter than me? Who does this work? And so Richard and I began a conversation and started to talk about, well, Bryan, I can actually put you in touch with our folks, and we can stand up that world language course inside of a month. And then you and I can iterate on that in terms of what that would mean for students. And it was a great lesson for me that I hope the listeners out there are thinking about. You don't have to have all the answers. You have to have access and knowledge of how to leverage the people, the organizations, the folks that can guide you in that work. And then you can still make decisions on where it goes from there. As a follow-on to that story, many will remember that I exited North Carolina Virtual in 2011 when I thought that, the state was looking at the platform as wildly innovative. And I was looking at it as, an opportunity certainly for access and to get, things out to folks, but that our innovation was being constrained by what we weren't learning from the rest of the United States and also from the rest of the world. So routinely, I didn't depend on my inner circle to teach me about what needed to happen with virtual. I reported to the governor, the state superintendent, the state board chair. They had solid ideas and they had things they wanted to see done for kids. But I wanted to walk across the street in the Triangle to IBM or to SAS or to learn from others about what was happening globally to really change the odds for kids. And I think we do a disservice sometimes in education when we kind of focus inwardly on how we experienced education. And we forget that there's a lot of multiple influences that can help us take down barriers and make that a different scenario. So those are a couple stories I would share. Richard, I'm curious, in your career recently over the past few years, what's been a seeming barrier that might have stopped you? And then how did you get through it?
Well, gosh, we'd probably need another couple of hours of this to go through all of those stories. But, there's a couple of maxims that I've always followed. You can almost think of them as being behind me on the wall. And when I went back and spoke at my high school, I talked about this. One of the things I think about frequently is this idea of creating your own reality. I remember going to my high school guidance counselor when I was getting ready to graduate high school. And I remember that my choices were multiple choice, like 5 or 6 though. It's like, here's 5 or 6 career paths you can choose: doctor, lawyer, teacher, engineer, military, banker. But it wasn't, this broad spectrum. So I was trying to choose between this little limited choice. And then I realized, once I got into college and out elsewhere, that life is not multiple choice, especially today. It is massively multiple choice. So I always urge young people today to keep that in mind. You mentioned we met in 2007. That's when the iPhone came out. Prior to that, app developer really didn't exist as a job. And today we have more app developers than we do farmers in the US, whereas 90% of everybody in the US in 1800 was a farmer. So, just realizing that there isn't just one path, there isn't just one definition of self. That's critically important. And the other is, perspective is worth 80 IQ points. That's what Alan Kay said, another friend of mine, a mentor of mine. It's that idea of inviting and listening to other people and other perspectives, because they do have insights you may not have. I remember when we were first looking at, like what you talked about, like how do we bring virtual worlds and games, harness serious games for education to get better outcomes. When you hand these 3D game worlds, especially to teachers initially, what the first thing they want to do is design a classroom, put desks in it, put the kids in the desk. We instead came out and said, look, from a gaming perspective, if I want to, how do you actually teach a foreign language like Russian to somebody? Well, the best way to learn a foreign language, as anybody knows who's done it, is to actually go to that country and be required to go and get your laundry done and go and eat in a restaurant and get a hotel and that sort of thing. That immediacy of immersion is what achieves the shortest path to mastery. But also, if I want to learn human anatomy, why am I sitting in a classroom looking at even a screen, or much less a board, when I can actually go inside the human body and travel around and go inside of cells and see how the systems of the body works? Or I can go to the surface of Mars or back in time to the Battle of Agincourt and relive it. That's the vision that we've had for some time, that's still unfulfilled because of the linear thinking of like, well, our education content has to fit within this certain format, with these these approvals for the curriculum, when the idea is like, let's take out that clean sheet of paper, solve for shortest path to mastery. But that mindset is what causes me to, and entrepreneurs in general, I think, to overcome obstacles. I know I've told you tons of stories about people telling me things you can't do. Like, if you're going to go raise money for your business, well, first, here's the model. You go make your 50-page business plan. Here's the prescribed template for it. It's taught in the business schools, and you go out and you do the PowerPoint presentation for it, and you go raise money. And it has to be under this structure. I can tell you now, I've raised $42 million for 6 different ventures. I've sold a couple of them. I've never used a formal business plan. The last money I raised was me sitting across from somebody, looking them in the eye, and me saying, here's what I want in an investor, and here's what I'm looking for, and doing a handshake and getting the money wired almost, right? So, there isn't just one path, and it's certainly not one path, and not even multiple choice. Yeah. It's massively multiple choice.
Love that. And, we're getting some comments on our Facebook Live. Just a reminder for those folks joining us, we'll have this on YouTube and posted on LinkedIn and our social channels, Eating Barriers for Breakfast, with some innovators that we admire and have collaborated with here at Setzer Group. I think what's happening a little bit in the comments is this sort of, healthy tension between what the World Economic Forum would call these essential skills, like critical thinking, the ability to apply design approaches to how we view the world, to have a sense of emotional intelligence and EQ. And then we're trying to juxtapose that with giving people experiences in a virtual world and partnering with machines. I know both of us believe that all of that's possible, but getting educators, getting organizations, getting nonprofits to think very differently about their work is a big part of our collective partnership together. So I want to focus our last period here on this past year. We experienced at scale partnerships between man and machine. some not so good, some okay, some outstanding. And here comes the beginning of 2021, and we have a lot of stimulus money in education around technology, training, remote infrastructure, how we're going to think about emergency management. One of the things that you and I are partnering a lot these days on is how to be prepared for the next pandemic, how to be prepared to re-enter from this pandemic. Talk a little bit about how you're thinking about that when we talk about, things that we've designed around understanding how school lunch drop-offs gives you data to also make decisions around laptop dissemination, or how, the way in which you enter a building or
Are you still there?
I know you're working across several of those efforts.
Yeah, one of the general thesis statements I have with regard to that is that I believe we're in the simulation century. I know I've dragged you to Joint Forces Command to speak to those folks. I do this every year, and I've done it for 10 years. The name of my little TED Talk session is called Simulation Century. And the thesis is the last century was about the moving image. It was the first time in human history when we would reflect upon current events and recent past events by looking at footage of it, right? Recorded footage. And that's, had this Marshall McLuhan-like effect on our brains and how we advance as societies and cultures. And I believe that this century is about simulation. That's taking all that data, applying the functions of AI, which is the old rules-based stuff, and machine learning, which is adaptive learning, and then trying to put it into a big sim and model the future. Like, let's model a world where climate change is under control and where pandemics are under control. Let's safely practice the way you would, Sullenberger safely practice landing an aircraft on a river. Let's practice that pandemic response. And we were actually already doing that. It was dismantled, of course, but I still have my pandemic tech cup around here somewhere from at South by Southwest 2 years ago, where we had a 2-day full thing around technologies around pandemic management. FEMA was there, everybody from Walmart to Home Depot to Lowe's to, healthcare providers, everybody. We were all talking about how do you deal with these major catastrophes as these black swan events that are inevitable in an increasingly complex environment. And we had plans and we had systems and we had simulations. They were disregarded and dismantled. And we've got to be smarter about that. And that does start with education, right? It's like recognizing the value of putting someone, even students, into these safe practice environments, and especially teams of people who can practice and prepare for all sorts of futures that we can imagine but have not yet come to pass. And that's a critical capability. And we have all the tools, and that's the good news. We got the tools, we have the capabilities, we just have to integrate them together and make them part of our regular process to make sure we're prepared.
Richard, really have enjoyed our time. I want to close with a couple of discussions, and then when I have you finish your part, I'll make sure to give our viewers a way to go back and, as Toffler says, sort of learn, unlearn, and relearn what we did today, right? Because I think we model that as well. So if a viewer today has experienced, 1 minute of a cutout or didn't hear something we have to say, we'll follow up today with a digital asset and continue this conversation. And you can certainly subscribe at Setzer Group and follow Tanjo AI at their website as well as ours, because we'll be pushing out communications and inviting people into the discussion. So I kind of want to leave our users with a charge. I want to encourage the heart and kind of say, you can do this. You can step out and partnering man and machine. So I'm going to talk about this from a couple of levels. And I want you to be thinking on your closing remarks, Richard, of a couple things they could do to build on my comments when they're eating berries for breakfast and looking at innovation downstream. Right now, there's a lot of resources going into COVID for our country. We have this unbelievable moonshot moment to do something very different with learning, assessment, technology, and training. So if I'm a leader of a university, a district, a nonprofit, a charter school, a for-profit, I'm looking at this 30-minute Facebook Live broadcast and I'm resharing it with my senior team. And I don't expect everybody to agree with what Richard and I have solved for. But what I want to encourage you to do is establish two teams in your organization: an operational team that worries about all of the implementation and what ifs and what mights, and an innovation team that applies a new or different or better practice to something you did before for greater outcomes for students, staff, community, you name it. In forming those two teams to reinvigorate how you come back from this pandemic, you have a team that's grounding you in the practical, but a team that's pushing your thinking. And that team that's pushing your thinking needs external voices, just as Richard and I have partnered over the years. We both can list a series of folks that really bring a different perspective. Second, design for equity. You need to include all the voices at the table that can address underserved groups, that can help you think about digital access and the ways in which you're going to negotiate trauma and bring people back into this world. One of Setzer Group's clients this year, I Thrive Games, does a great job of putting people in simulations that not only helps them navigate the world and navigate their social and emotional learning context, but helps them apply those critical thinking skills to move to the next place. Finally, when you keep your eye on what Richard and I are collaborating on in the next year, you're going to learn a lot more about how man and machine, woman and machine, various groups and organizations and teams start to come together to leverage tech for good. So those would be my three charges to you. Make sure that you form two teams. One that's going to keep you grounded and also growth mindset oriented. Number two, really start to think about the whole child and how there's a lot of technology, assistive technology, that can help make that possible. And finally, keep an eye on this Facebook Live series. We'll be bringing in innovators throughout the year. Richard and I'll be sharing more about our collaborations. Richard, I'm going to give the final pass to you on a few things you want organizations to do, and then I'll close us out and let people know where to find us.
Great. So, I'm just thinking on some of the remarks you just made, and it's causing me to think about my friend, Mark Prensky. In machine learning, we have this concept called utility function. So you create a set of adaptive AI type systems that can learn and head towards a goal. And that goal is the utility function, whatever that happens to be. So I would urge people, think about your utility function as empowerment. Think about everything we just talked about. Again, whether you're solving for equity or you're trying to create the right kinds of people that can thrive in a faster future, a society that can be better. It's about, and Mark Prensky's actually right. I don't want to, hopefully I'm not giving away his ideas for his book right now. He's got a couple of books coming out, but he talks about now empowerment. He's not talking about, oh, we have to do critical thinking, we have to do this or that with students or our education system today. He's saying, let's solve for empowerment. An empowered individual is someone who has agency, who's not bounded by single path or multiple choice constraints, but has that massively multiple choice view of the world, that they can get either alone or teaming up with other people and machines. They can go and solve problems, and that anything is possible if we just work together. I remember, I'm not going to remember his name right now, but I had a teacher in UNC Chapel Hill when I was there who said, most of human suffering on earth is simply the result of bad ideas. And that has always echoed and resonated with me ever since. Like, if we just had better ideas, apply the right technology, the right mindset, we can overcome things or minimize the effect of, for example, let's talk about what happened in the last year or the last 4 or 5 years. And we've had two major issues, right? One is this series of pandemics, which has finally resulted in this one big one of COVID. And, I like to say that, there are lots and lots of viruses out there. What makes a virus that's out there in nature a pandemic is bad human behavior, bad ideas, people not behaving and working together in an empowered way to address the problem. If you can do that, you don't have a pandemic. Same thing with mind viruses. And that's big education issue. There's mind viruses out there. There's all kinds of bad information like QAnon and crap like that that's out there. What makes these mind viruses, attacking the Capitol and flying an airplane into a building, or any of these sort of bad, or what we just saw in Atlanta and unfortunately in Boulder? Those are mind viruses that are causing bad behavior, and we need to address those through empowerment, through teams, working with machines and people together to figure out what's true and valuable and what's actionable, and how do we act on that in a coordinated way. And if we can get everybody pulling in that direction, we will have a brighter future. If we let technology continue to go rampant and cutting in the wrong direction, it's going to be a little grim. So that's my admonishment there is think about, let's solve for empowerment.
Yep. Richard, thank you for those comments. And I think, we are at an inflection point, and as humans, we have the opportunity to really bring to bear healthy options to those viruses. I so appreciate you mentioning the sort of three pandemics that we're going through of, Corona, but also how we're dealing with race and social justice in our society and combating anti-racism as an example. And also this pandemic of misinformation that Ken Burns talks about, where, we've got to get a handle on truth and accuracy and how we verify that with each other. And these are great problems for humans to solve. So the good thing is we can partner tech in solving them, act on that data, and make real change. Folks that are listening to our Facebook Live for the first time, we will post this on YouTube, on the Setzer Group website, as well as the Tanjo AI website. We'll be doing one of these every month and coming back to you in terms of bringing innovation leaders into the space. Hope you've enjoyed your time today. And, I would probably close with just thanking everybody for their time and attendance, and we'll follow up with you soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Bryan. Thanks, everybody.